Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to bring you this guest today with Sara. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm so happy to be here, Karolina.
Oh, thank you. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So my name's Sara Povey. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist based out of Long Beach, California. I am also the founder of Empower Marriage and Family Therapy, Inc. We are a small group practice, all virtual, all with different specialties and serving different populations. But I specifically help women who want to unlearn and deconstruct old beliefs and ways of being in the world that have kept them small and frozen and powerless. As I'm sure we're going to cover a lot more on this podcast episode when we go through painful, devaluing, traumatic experiences, we learn to live defensively in survival mode. And we tend to carry around a lot of shame. So the work that I do as a trauma therapist helps women get past their past so they can live more embodied, authentic lives and get out of survival mode in their relationships.
Well, I cannot wait to unpack this with you. There's so many things I want to ask right off the cuff about the work you do and just what you've seen to be effective modalities to help women. And I just see myself in what you said too. You know, a lot of what happened in my life from childhood to my adolescence to young adulthood really devalued what I believed I was worth. And so really coming back up to change those stories and those beliefs has been such important work. I'll probably be doing it for the rest of my life. But tell us, why did you get involved in this work? So what's your backstory?
Yeah, I'm a fellow traveler. My journey started really with alcohol. Alcohol and my drinking was a catalyst into my own healing. And I think alcohol, and if you are struggling with drinking, it can really be this invitation into exploring yourself more deeply. I think alcohol can be a truth medicine in a lot of ways and point us in the right direction. I was pretty young when I started drinking, and it was never, to the point where it was affecting my school or my relationships until I got to college. And I started drinking more heavily and kind of living this double life where I on the surface looked like everything was together. I graduated with honors. I was a TA for research methods. I had a boyfriend. Everything looked good on the outside, but I was drinking a lot. I was hiding how much I was drinking. Before I went out with friends, I would take a few shots in my room. And it got to a point where it started to really affect my self-esteem. My skin was breaking out. I thought I had stomach ulcers, and it just was really not a pretty picture. And during that time, I got very out of alignment with who I really was. And I ended up withdrawing from a botany class, which set me behind in school. And I had to go on this January term to make sure I had enough credits to graduate. And I went to New Mexico on this kind of wilderness retreat. And it was all around connecting with your wild, instinctive, true nature. And it was there where, I stopped drinking. I didn't have access to cell phone reception, and I was kind of left with my own thoughts. And it was there that I started reading Women Who Run with the Wolves. I started doing my own work in terms of therapy, acupuncture, Reiki, reading, a lot of my own self-exploration and also a lot of guided exploration, and decided to become a holistic psychotherapist and incorporate all of these different modalities. And so that's how I found the path. I was in therapy for a pretty long time, and going to school to become a therapist really felt like an extension of my journey, right? Like that I had been through this, and I wanted to help other women navigate through their own kind of internal dark forest, so to speak.
Well, I think that's just such a cool story because it's basically a story of awakening, to your true nature, your true self. And you got to have it when you're pretty young, so it's like this career you formed at wasn't this career you kind of sleptwalked into. Like you really intentionally chose it based on, your experiences. And I love that so much. And I just think that anytime we awaken from alcohol, whether we're in our 20s, 30s, 50s, 60s, 70s, it's always a chance for reimagining, reawakening, reinvention of who we are and what we do. And I think that's the purpose. I think that's the point of doing that. So I love to hear that that's how you were kind of awoken to your own journey and how you can help other people. So going back to how you introduced yourselves, like, let's just pretend I know nothing and I probably know nothing. Let's pretend my audience knows nothing. Like, there's some really cool models and modalities and therapies that you mentioned that can be really effective to help women. And especially as, a marriage therapist and someone who really works with people with their past kind of stories and identities that they've formed over time, you mentioned that you specialize in internal family systems. So let's pretend we have no idea what that is. Can you just explain, like, a really beginner's understanding of what that is and how it could help you contextualize the identity you formed over your life and how to change it?
Totally. The first time I heard internal family systems, I thought it was family therapy. I thought it was, okay, we're going to invite everyone into the room in a family and we're going to talk and figure out how the system works. And it's not that. It's figuring out your internal system. It's an evidence-based model. It's created by Dick Schwartz. If you look him up on YouTube, he has a ton of amazing videos. But it's based on the premise that our minds are multiple. So we have multiple personalities in a pathological way. It's not dissociative identity disorder where you have alters, but we have multiples, and we have these different parts of ourselves that have evolved to serve a purpose. And internal family systems, or IFS, recognizes that behaviors, including, drinking heavily or shopping or, compulsive sexuality, any of these things that we do kind of compulsively are fueled by psychological burdens that are caused by trauma, attachment wounds, or, like I said earlier, devaluing experiences. Now, there's a structure around talking about the different parts of ourselves, right? Because we could, in theory, have hundreds of parts of ourselves that exist to protect us and serve us in all these different ways. But I really love that internal family systems gives kind of a map to understanding the anatomy of yourself. So there's the self, there's exiles, there's managers, and there's firefighters. And I'll kind of go over this and provide some examples so people can understand, like, what this even means and how we might work with it, specifically around exploring sobriety and what the drinking part of us might be trying to accomplish. So first of all, the self is a positive way of feeling. Everyone has this, even though sometimes we may feel disconnected from ourselves. I think we tend to use that kind of language to describe feeling cut off from our true nature, which is what I experienced in my journey. But the self is the most instinctual, kind of calm, centered, compassionate part of ourselves that is kind of a witness or a higher self, a version of ourselves that looks at all of the other parts of ourselves with equal parts acceptance and trust, right? This is self energy, and it's really helpful to have that when you're doing this work. A lot of trauma work isn't going straight into the most painful parts of our psyche. First, it's establishing safety in ourselves and connecting us with a grounded presence so that we can kind of root into that as we explore more painful parts of ourselves. The exiles are kind of like the part of us that was ridiculed in second grade when somebody said something mean to you. These are the fragile parts that are vulnerable, maybe due to neglect, attachment injuries, boundary violations, and they're young, typically young and injured. So, and they're also unconscious, but they're still there. Even though they're unconscious, they're still there, and they want so badly to be seen and witnessed and comforted. And in internal family systems, we call these exiles. They're the parts that go into hiding or are locked away internally. And then we have these protective parts of ourselves. We have the managers and we have the firefighters. The managers help us to avoid the pain of our exiles. So they keep them hidden and quiet, because if we're overflowing and so overwhelmed with pain all the time, like how are we supposed to function in our lives? So manager parts may be the overly responsible one, or very future oriented, risk averse, maybe a little more cautious, highly functioning. And these are also parts of, parts that are celebrated in our culture, right? Like the overachiever, the perfectionist, the person that never rests and never stops moving. And for women especially, I think the caretaker is a manager. And these are all aimed at helping us to avoid the pain of those young and injured parts of ourselves. So if the managers are doing a good enough job at protecting the vulnerable exiles, then our second line of defense, if they're doing a good enough job, then they can kind of function until they hit a roadblock. If they aren't successful and the pain of the exiles comes up, then our second line of defense is our firefighters. And these are the parts of us that jump in so that we're not taken over with that pain. And these parts of ourselves are survival oriented. So think fight, flight, freeze, fawn. An example of a firefighter may be the part of us that drinks or overeats or shops or self-harms. These are impulsive, compulsive, rebellious parts, and they're so focused on survival and escape from unbearable pain that they have no concern for collateral damage. So they can be really, really destructive and wreak havoc on our lives and generate a lot of shame. So, it's helpful to understand how these parts are playing out in your life. There's a lot of healing that takes place just from having the awareness that these parts exist within ourselves. There's usually also a conflict or a polarity that happens between the managers and the firefighters. So maybe our listeners can connect to this, but I see a lot of new moms really enjoying the relief they feel at the end of the evening. They put the child to sleep, they have a big glass of wine, they shut off, they fall asleep, the morning comes, and they feel tired and have anxiety and just feel like they can't be present with their kids. And that generates a lot of shame, right? And then the cycle of conflict begins. She enjoys the relief, the brain shut off, the internal quiet, which then kicks up that sense of shame. The firefighter steps in, wants to drink, and then the manager, the inner critic, really hates that the firefighter drank so much last night and goes into a shame spiral. And you can just see how it is like self-generating, and how the judgment and the shame come in that then cause her to drink and wake up and feel shame and then drink again. So internal family systems really helps you to understand your parts and the role that they play to keep you safe and to keep you out of pain. And as your therapist, we will help you learn your way around the parts, befriend your parts, have compassion for your parts, because what I see a lot, especially with drinking, is there's so much shame and we don't have compassion for what it is doing for us and how it is self-protective, even though it feels so self-destructive. It's a very compassionate style of therapy. There's a common phrase, no bad parts. We try to stay out of pathologizing any part of the human experience. When it comes to sobriety, the goal is not to enroll your inner critic and shame yourself into staying sober. The goal is not to shame yourself. Shame is not a motivating force for change. You are very well aware of that. And I've heard you talk about it on different episodes. The therapy using IFS helps you to witness and reparent and unburden and release the managers and firefighters from the burden of responsibility. And it also helps these parts of you learn to trust you to take care of them, which is just a really magical process, and just something that I think is very, very helpful if you're taking away any sort of coping mechanism like alcohol, or any way that you're checking out of your day-to-day world.
Thank you so much for sharing that really, really in-depth explanation. And, I guess what I think I'm hearing is that, we all have the exiles, we have all the young wounded parts of ourselves. And whether or not we're consciously experiencing that in the future, we have a threat to our psychological safety in some shape or form. Even a stressful workday could do it. So then the manager and the firefighters come in to handle it. So kind of going back to that exile then, this wounded child and kind of the idea of trauma. I think we've all been familiar with the idea of trauma and the big T examples of like really horrific things happening to very vulnerable people, whether that's sexual abuse or regular abuse or sexual trauma, any things like that. And then we have like the little T of like just experiencing pain, ridicule, judgment, all these things at really fragile ages as well. And, I can just think of like any example for a child that could be traumatic. For example, like little 3-year-old asking their mom for ice cream at the store, and the mom berates them of like, why do you think we can afford ice cream? And that's wrong to desire that. And they were so innocent in their questioning, and they just get shamed. And for a parent, it's just another day. Like they're just trying to manage, they're just trying to get out of the store alive. But, a little kid could really pick that up and even not consciously remember it, but have that be part of their wound. So would you say it's true that every single human on this planet has at least some form of trauma?
Yeah, I would say that. I define trauma as anything that happens to you that changes your relationship to yourself and or changes your relationship to the world and the way that you move through the world. You're absolutely right with the 3-year-old and the ice cream. We don't think about what it's like to be a child moving through the world, and just how big these events can be for them, for their little minds. They're moving through the world, they're trying to figure out and make sense of their surroundings, and just little things like that, or losing a blanket or losing a pacifier. These things can be really, really big and impactful.
Yeah. And so like coming from that understanding then that whether we've had really, really horrific things happen in our life or just a very, a lot of people say like, I've had a good life, or, my childhood wasn't that bad, is almost to justify that they shouldn't be feeling the way that they're feeling, like this shouldn't be a problem, or I shouldn't be having issues. But I think kind of making this blanket statement that like growing up as a young child is very hard, and there's going to be painful occurrences that happen, whether they're big things or little things. So then like as an adult now, and, really understanding that I'm not going to be able to remember or even maybe go back to what those experiences were, like, how would you walk someone through different modalities of facing and opening up to trauma when there's not like a specific occurrence, if that makes sense? Like I can't pinpoint, okay, I was 8, this happened, blah, blah, blah. It's just a life. I don't know, a normal life.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And something like I hear a lot with people, they don't have a particular memory or this horrific thing that happened to them, but they see something playing out in their present reality, or something they do in the relationship, or something that really triggers them. And we can use what's happening in their present moment to kind of build a roadmap back to, if we can't connect to vivid details or memory, maybe we can connect to body sensations, maybe we can connect to emotions, maybe we can connect to a feeling of distress that may not have a picture that goes along with it or a memory that goes along with it, but it's there and it's alive in the body. EMDR is really, it's a really powerful tool to work with memories that aren't necessarily tied to events, and more specifically tied to body sensations or different emotions.
Yeah. Can you give
triggers.
us another beginner's understanding of EMDR?
Yes, yeah, it's such a weird thing to explain because it's almost unfathomable how it works, but
Hmm.
EMDR is short for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which is just a fancy way of saying that we use eye movement or any sort of bilateral stimulation, just stimulating both hemispheres of the brain in order to calm the nervous system down enough while we talk about a traumatic memory so that your psychological defenses don't come in and block you from reprocessing that and moving that out of your body and your nervous system. It's a very brief therapy. It's 8 phases. I've seen people do 1 session of the reprocessing and go from a very high level of distress when they think of that particular memory to it feeling totally neutral by the end of 1 session. It's magical. It's a technology that really just allows the body to do what's possible, right? What the body's meant to do. The body is constantly moving towards healing. We just have to get the stuff that's stopping it from healing, like fight, flight, freeze, these survival responses that stop us from reprocessing the memory. We have to make sure that we're regulated enough when we're talking about these traumatic memories and material so that we can get through it in a calm state. And it desensitizes the memory so that people aren't hijacked by their nervous system when they're walking down the street or when their partner goes out for a boys' night out. They're not totally triggered and feeling abandoned like they did when they were 3 years old at the grocery store, right?
And so I'm curious, you also talked about, thank you so much for that explanation. It's true, like you either have to like do it or see it in action, because it just sounds so magical. But for anyone who's definitely dealing with those kind of experiences, like it's worth your happiness, I think, to explore these kind of therapies more. You mentioned earlier too about the idea of having experiences that devalue us, that then lower our sense of self-worth over time. And now let's say we're at this healing journey. We're at this place where alcohol is slowly losing its, function in our life. We're awakening, we're healing. Some of this stuff might be coming up. I believe that my self-worth, and I think that, this is a personal opinion, but I do think that self-worth can be expressed by my reality in life. Like, how much goodness do I have? How much love do I allow in my life? How much abundance do I allow in my life? How much happiness, because if I'm not allowing very much, it usually means I have a lower sense of self-worth. So I've seen my self-worth grow over time ever since I started my health healing journey, but I still have a huge staircase to go. Huge, right? Huge staircase. So talk a little bit about that. Like, what is it with experiences that devalue us? What are examples of that? And then how can we build up our value and remember our intrinsic value and self-worth over time?
That's a really beautiful question. I love the idea of the staircase because we're constantly evolving in this work. Trauma always comes with a side dish of shame. It's like the added bonus, 2 for 1. You get this traumatic experience. And in EMDR, we name the memory, the traumatic experience, and then the next question is, what's the negative cognition or belief that you have about yourself that goes along with this? There's such a close connection with trauma and shame. And when we start to do this work and peel back the layers, so to speak, you start to uncover these old beliefs, right, that have no truth to them, right? There's no validity. It's old, it's fictional. And it's easy to say, okay, well, I'm just going to believe that I'm a valuable person and lovable and deserving of all of the goodness in my life, right? And we can design a life that's so beautiful. And I have a lot of clients that do that. Their lives look just gorgeous from the outside, but on some level, their body is not buying it. They are like, I'm not lovable, actually. I'm doing all the things, but deep down, logically, I know I'm lovable and I have these high standards for my relationships, but there's this kind of niggling feeling of I'm not lovable. There's something about me. Like once I'm 6 months into a relationship, people are going to find out. They're going to discover this like defective part of me that they are going to leave and abandon. So I think doing trauma work and working with the body as an ally helps to integrate that trauma so that you know it logically, you're worthy of love, and you have choice and you are worthy on a logical level, and you're also feeling that somatically on a body level. Like you can feel it in your cells that you are deserving of love and you're lovable, right? And the power that has to then be reflected outward it's magnificent. And it is a lot different when it's coming from that kind of core self-worth versus I'm going to buy all the nice things and hustle for worthiness and never stop moving. It's just, as a business owner, it can be really easy to hustle for a sense of worthiness or approval in the world. But when you have that intrinsic sense of value, that you don't have to do that, and there is this kind of natural abundance that comes from it. It is a privilege to feel so lovable and valuable and to do this trauma work. The self-worth piece, I think, is really, really important. And I think that when women, specifically women, connect to their sense of self-worth and peel back these layers and debunk the myths that they've told themselves all these years, they stop wanting to do these kind of numbing behaviors and things that take them out of their presence and devalue their lives, right? And the relationships they're finding themselves in. And I think when you have self-worth, you start taking care of your body differently. You start to choose different people to be around. You just kind of move through the world in a different way.
Yeah. I loved how you described the difference between the intellectual understanding, because I think, we get there, we start, maybe doing affirmations or other kind of processes to intellectually buy into that. But then there's something like deep in that subconscious or in that body somatics that hasn't quite changed and hasn't quite had that identity evolution. And so, what is that missing piece then between the intellectual understanding and that like full body yes?
Yeah. I personally think that it is reprocessing trauma and using the body as an ally. So in the therapeutic community, we use this phrase, the bottom-up approach, right? We're not doing talk therapy and increasing insight to then feel better and solve the problem. We are dropping into the body, listening to what it's telling us, looking at your posture, what that may be communicating, using more body-based oriented therapies like EMDR, internal family systems, somatic experiencing, Reiki, massage therapy, that kind of thing. Because I think that even though the mind knows that you're worthy and you're doing all these affirmations and mantras, which I think can be a really beautiful complement to this work, on some level, we have to address that young nervous system that is still very active in our present lives. I follow this great therapist. She's a trauma therapist called Britt Frank, and she has this great quote: "The past will remain present until it is processed," right? And so a lot of us are 5-6 years old walking around in adult bodies, and we haven't parented or witnessed or healed that young part of ourselves. So those old stories from a child's point of view are making their way into our adult understanding of the world.
Yeah. That's such a good way of looking at it. And I can't wait to ask to, find out like how people can work with you and where to find you, because it just seems so valuable. But before I leave with that question, I just want to ask, if someone wanted to learn more or just start this, based on any topic that kind of came up today, do you have like a book recommendation that you just love to share with people that kind of goes over these concepts?
Yes, absolutely. So my favorite one is No Bad Parts by Dick Schwartz. He's the creator of Internal Family Systems. And then Francine Shapiro's book, Getting Past Your Past. It's also a really powerful book about EMDR.
Thank you so much. Okay, so where can we find you, Sarah, to work with you, to connect with you on social media, share all the deets?
Totally. So you can find me on my website, www.empowertherapyandcoaching.com. All one word, all spelled out. I'm very active on Instagram at empower.mft is my Instagram handle. And I'm also running a Sober Curious group on Thursday. It starts on Thursday. I'm not sure if it would have started by the time this podcast releases, but I do have a blog, and that's also on the website under Sober Curious.
I just love that when you start your healing journey, like there's so much to learn and so much to just go into. And, we can spend a phase of our lives like working on this part, then that part. And I don't think that that's sad, that there's just so much healing to do. I think it's exciting. I think that getting down to the deeper layers of ourselves and who we are, what we really want on this planet, what we really deserve, I think it's like part of our purpose to uncover who we truly are. And thank God it doesn't end, because then we would be bored. Then we would run out of meaning to create in our lives. So thank you, Sarah, so much for sharing all of these incredible tools with us. And we will link in the show notes all of her links that you can go to find her and check her out on social media. So thank you so much. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I really have enjoyed this conversation, the questions that you ask, and the work that you're putting in your world. I think that trauma is your medicine, and the more you can kind of drop into your own work, the more alive, awakened, and magical you are in the world. So I love your energy, and thanks for having me on the show.
Of course.